YouTube, where members of the public can watch and are able to post comments. Please note that any comments posted on the chat feed of the Council's YouTube page during the recording of this meeting won't be monitored by the Council, and I would ask people of the public that are minded to comment to please bear in mind other people and be respectful in the comments they make. Thank you very much. A recording of this committee will be available on the Council's website following the meeting. And I would ask members that this is, as it's not a formal meeting being held face to face, there is no legislative provision for remote meetings. No formal decisions can be taken on behalf of the Council at this meeting. Instead, it's an opportunity for members of the committee to debate and give a steer on their views relating to matters on the agenda and for them to subsequently progress by officers. Any urgent decisions will be taken by the Chief Executive in accordance with the urgent decision procedure rules that form part of the Council's constitution. I would ask, please, all mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so the meetings are interrupted by ringtones. And if you can switch your profile to mute unless you're speaking, that would be appreciated. If you wish to speak, there is the raise hands button, or for those that don't have the raise hands button, just please raise your hand. As it's an informal meeting, we're not going to sort of hopefully get bent out of shape about it. And the idea is for this just to be A, constructive, and secondly, to be able to proceed with the business of the Council while we're in the unfortunate position that we're in with COVID. So with having said all of that, do you have any apologies for absence, please, Karina?
No, none received. I think we're all here.
Well,
yeah,
welcome everybody.
Yeah.
And the first item on the agenda, item 2, is the social responsibility policy update. Who's due to be presenting that?
That's me, Chairman. Tom Conniff, Strategy Insights Partnerships Manager.
Well, good evening, Tom, and go for it.
Good evening. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so this is a verbal update then to follow on from the paper on delivering social responsibility policy that was taken at the last meeting of the committee in October. Since then, officers have spoken with colleagues involved in implementing the Wigan deal to see what lessons can be applied learned to apply in a Basildon context. As a result, and where relevant to do so, future council communications will refer to the community's role in working with us to deliver a better Basildon. More widely, officers are forming a 3-pillar approach to developing social value and social responsibility in Basildon, and these can be summarised as follows. Number 1, measuring and monitoring social value capture through the national TOMS framework. We are working with colleagues at Essex County Council to define common and specific measures to allow us in time to demonstrate how much social value we are creating and capturing through our procurement and commissioning activities. So that's the first strand. The second, looking at institutional social value, or the social responsibility piece that was talked about last time. In other words, how we as a council create social value through our activity more generally. The recent tree planting exercise in Gloucester Park using volunteers from the council provides just one example of how we are doing this. But of course, there are many others. That's the second strand. And the third is engaging with and influencing locally based businesses who themselves have corporate social responsibility programs to ensure that the value from these programs is captured for Basildon residents. These strands that we're looking at in terms of social value and social responsibility. Officers will bring a paper to March's resources and Commercial Committee that will set out the metrics. To this end, senior offerly being refined in good time to present to members. They will not, however, represent the whole social value picture, and so work will continue to define and capture this ahead of future updates to this committee. Thank you.
Any members have any comments or wish to speak on this item? While people are cogitating, I can see Councillor Smith, so bear with me a second, Kerry, and I'll come to you. You're talking about metrics, but metrics to me, as an uninitiated person, start to sound like figures and KPIs. Is that what you're talking about, or are we going to have something which is very simple and like plain English speak about the council will, and this is our function, and this is what we expect from the public in return for that function? I don't know if you're on mute or just Can't be heard. Or frozen.
It did sound like Tom had a bad connection, didn't it, Chair?
It did a bit.
Oh, he's
and,
back.
Yeah, we're aiming to have something, a statement of the. On mute. We will have a statement built on that and sets out what we will do. Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we will have a statement that we have a social value policy that contains the building blocks for us to bring forward a statement that says what we as a council will do. But the measures is effectively just to quantify the amount of social value that we're involved in creating. So while they are performance metrics, actually what they do is assign financial values to this. So we'll be able to see just how much social value we're creating. And that's not something we've actually been able to do to date. So that's work that's going on with Essex, and that sits alongside the work that you've asked about there, Councillor.
Thank you. I know Kelly's been very patient there, and I appreciate it. Just that I do know that when this was first mooted, and I know this is something that was very dear to Councillor Henry's part, it was this juxtaposition of being able to communicate to the public and say, this is what the council is going to do for you, but this is what we expect from your social responsibility as to how you can support us in doing that. And that's something that I'm quite keen to roll out, because it is very, very explicit then that this is what we're going to do, and this is our expectation from the public. And I think that's quite a clear message then of the relationship that we should be having with the public in that regard.
Yeah.
Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes,
oh, brilliant.
Smith.
Thank you. I thought I'd better start off with a declaration. There's a few of my colleagues here from Essex tonight. I don't know if that's reasonable to have to declare, but better safe than sorry. I wondered, and it might be a bit of a stretch too far. Now, we have a number of planning applications in the borough that are approved and they're underway. There's one that's in my ward of a few years of age. It's being constructed. It's now being populated. But I seem to get the impression that once a developer has gained planning permission, they've paid their 106 agreements, they've done the things they've been instructed to do by the relevant authorities such as us, Essex with regards to highways and schools. But when it's the little things, so that development in my ward, I won't say the name because they're not here to defend themselves, but I've got a case ongoing where the residents between that development and an established estate in my ward would like some semi-mature trees planted to mitigate between the noise and keep the two estates separate. And then developers like, no. So I just wondered if we could just work together with people we've granted planning permission to say that you do have a social responsibility. Yes, you've got your planning permission, you've ticked all the boxes with regards to planning law, but you do have an interest with with the people neighbouring you. You've got a social responsibility. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman, and let the officers think possibly if there's something we can look at. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Malcolm.
Thanks, Chairman. Couple of things, just picking up on Councillor Smith's point there around developers and adding social value to any schemes that they bring forward. It is perfectly feasible. Yes, there are agreements around Section 106 and the like contributions to highways, education, and all of the other things that we need to see. But there is nothing at all to stop discussions taking place either before or after the planning decision is issued to say, yeah, you need to do these things, but if you want some tree planting, for example, ask the developer for it. Most developers, if they think they're going to get a smoother ride, they'll be glad to help on those things. Because in the scheme of the development I believe Councillor Smith is referring to, the amount of money would be, pennies, not pounds, to their scheme. So I think we do need to think carefully about that. The point I actually indicated to speak on, though, was mentioned in part by the officer, but unfortunately, with the signal cutting in and out, it might or might not have made the point which I wanted to raise. And that was around the assessment of social value when we're procuring, whether it's a service, a project, or whatever. And as a member of Essex, it's something which I've discussed a number of times with the relevant cabinet member there. And it's very easy to look at some contracts. There's one I've signed off myself recently. And one of the key factors on it that determined which was the successful bidder was actually the social value element of that. But what is social value? Is social value maintaining employment, for example, or is it creating employment, or is it involving the community as a whole? I think the real challenge to officers, yes, you do need to put a financial figure on them to make an assessment, but what is the value of contributing to a landscaping scheme that might get the local community involved with tidying up their local park, or in which we've got a very successful group that work in the memorial park and so on. And I think it's really around being clear about what the methodology is to determine how much social value has been added with whatever project you have. So I'll just leave it there, Chairman.
No, I think it's a good point, and I do recall some years ago when we had scrutiny and KPIs and the audit commission and all that sort of jolly stuff. One of the KPIs we had, which always sort of made me quizzical, was a KPI around how happy a community was. And again, you know, if West Ham have lost in a certain community one evening, the community is going to be less happy than if they've won. So the idea of having a KPI around how happy somebody is just does seem a little bit bizarre. And this is the same if we're not careful with social value, because everybody will have a different viewpoint on what the value is and how much weight it is in any given circumstance. But Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You almost invite me there to remind you that West Ham won yesterday, but let's move on from that point. Just in relation to some of the other, actually to Councillor Buckley and Councillor Smith's points there. And thank you, Mr. Cunliffe, for taking us through this. And certainly, I think County Councillor McGurran, when he was chair of the COVID Recovery Committee, was certainly looking at social value and social responsibility across the council. And this was a key area that we wanted to develop a policy about. Now that it's got to this stage, can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between this policy, the procurement policy, and the emerging Good Employers Charter, and how they relate to each other?
I shall certainly try, Councillor. So the policy, in effect, talked about social value in terms of procurement and commissioning, based on the Public Services Social Value Act 2012. That has quite a narrow focus in terms of how social value is defined and measured. But there is a recognition in wider circles that social value extends beyond the scope of that particular act and beyond procurement and commissioning activities. And I think what we're discussing here is about finessing that and defining that and focusing in on that. So it's more than just the narrow confines, I think, of social value as defined by legislation. We do need to measure that, because certainly for procurement and commissioning and contracts management activity, there's work going on at county that we're involved in, that we're plugging into. But social value in that sphere is emerging. It's less well defined in the institutional space, as we've just been talking about here. And I think Councillor Buckley's points are very informative in this regard. We need to be careful how we define this, because otherwise, you know, social value becomes all things to all people, and actually we lose any utility for us as an organisation in working out how efficient we are, how much we capture, and what types of social value we capture. I don't really want to create an industry here, and I'm aware of the potential dangers of doing so. In relation to the Good Employers Charter, as I understand it, that's just one, I suppose, activity. Clearly, being a good employer is one aspect of the wider social value that we're looking at, the institutional piece. And I know that the Good Employers Charter is something that we're working with businesses locally to try and get them to adopt. It's not in my sphere of influence. I can, of course, take it away to officer colleagues and answer any specific queries if you have them on that one.
Did you want to come back, Jack?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Cunliffe, for that. Certainly welcome the response there. I suppose where I'm coming particularly on in relation to this is that there are external partners who we would expect to abide by the social responsibility policy, our procurement policy, which has some social value within that, and the Good Employers Charter. What I want to make sure is that we're not overloading them with lots of different things separately when actually there's a joined up piece of work that needs to be done here.
Thanks, Jack. Does anybody else want to comment on this
Yes,
item?
thank you, Councillor. I think if I may just be permitted to come back on that. Yeah, thank you. Recognise the complexity you refer to. I think this is why this piece of work is taking quite so long, and we're having so many bites at it, because actually it's a complex set of issues that's important we get right. Otherwise we will end up going down a lot of rabbit holes, and I'm keen to make sure that we do join up everything as much as possible. That's after all part of my role here, is to make sure that all these things link together. So we'll certainly continue in that regard, Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah. And just picking up on that, I mean, a concern I would have, especially when it comes to procurement, is hypothetically you get two different people procuring for something. One says they're going to add social value by planting trees and affecting climate change in a positive way. Someone else says what we're going to do is provide books for this local school and provide education. How do you now weight the social value of both of those on a procurement exercise to decide that one should have more merit over the other? That's where it starts to get into a potential quagmire, I'd have thought, and therefore we do need to be quite explicit about our policy and expectations.
I think on that particular point, Councillor, what I would say is part of the work that we're doing with Essex is about defining those measures of social value that are of priority to us, and that would help us, I think, in making that assessment that you've just described. So that work's continuing to identify common themes with Essex, but then with officers to look at the ones that specifically inform the work that we want to do here in Basildon. So I think those two sets of social value TOMs, as they call them, would be, we'd look to those first to see which way we would go in making that contract award. Again, not my area of expertise, but as a layperson, that's my understanding of what this work will do in order to help us prioritise and make those decisions in future contract awards.
Thank you. I'll just echo what others have said, and thank you for the work that's put in so far, and look forward to seeing some meat coming on the bone at a later meeting.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Anybody else wanting to comment on this item before we move on to item 3? Okay, thank you. Item 3, which is the corporate plan, which is on page 3 of your agendas, and I believe this is Stuart, is it?
Thank you, Chairman. This is an update on the organisation strategy element of the corporate plan, and members may recall that in 2020 the predecessors of this committee agreed an organisation strategy. It's a collection of strategies. We also looked at a workforce strategy and an IT strategy, and this report aims to provide members with an update on progress on those. Mr. Chairman, it's with some trepidation that I bring a report that includes technology when we are in the hands of Zoom and internet connections. I hope to get through my presentation without dipping out, but I'm sure you'll wave at me if I do drop out. So you've got a paper in your agenda, your virtual agenda packs that includes the update. I just wanted to touch on a few key elements this evening and then take questions. So it's a report for noting, Chair and Committee. There are the principles of the organisation strategy outlined in the report, and what we've been doing is working on our ways of working, our systems, our processes, the skills within the organisation, the hardware that we use, our infrastructure over the last 18 months to work towards a new way of operating, a new relationship with our residents. And I've tried to capture that in your paper at page 4 with an operating model. This is not an organisational structure, nor is it a list of IT systems. Instead, it's an attempt to put the resident at the centre of what we do. So the diagram shows just that, the resident at the centre, and then it aims to show how we will build a joined up way of residents being able to contact us, so that the resident record is joined up regardless of whether the resident writes to us, phones us, turns up at one of our offices, emails us, sends us a text, or indeed any other social media method of communication, that record will always join up. So that we will hold data and customer records in a seamless way between our services. That is not the case now. We're also working towards an operating model where that data is then applied to a standardised set of work processes. It won't surprise members that because the council's evolved over a number of years, we've got different work processes in different parts of the council. So if you apply for a benefit, there's a separate record held on you than if you want to play a game of tennis, than if you want to talk about your loft extension and so on. And what we're aiming to do under this piece of work is to join up all of that information, join up those work processes so that the resident has a much more seamless experience with us. So that's captured in the operating model, and I would ask members to note the model and perhaps raise it in questions when I've finished. We aim to deliver the operating model through a number of reviews. The reviews are listed out in your paper. At the moment, we are in the process of delivering a customer case management review. We have started in phase one by looking at the instances when a customer might contact us for a freedom of information request or a subject access request, when they are contacting us to give us a compliment or a complaint. And in scope this time is councillor inquiries as well. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a moment. Concurrently with that review, we're running a review in waste services. As members on this committee who are also involved with the waste strategy will know, we are looking at how our routes are worked out. We're looking at how we can digitalise our collection service, that is a missed collection, a special collection, an assisted collection, how we can make sure that the information from the resident gets into the cab of the truck as quickly and seamlessly as possible. So those are reviews that are going on at the moment. And then we've got planned in the pipeline reviews of how we pay and how we get paid, reviews of our whole financial and HR management systems, and we will be looking at our critical housing systems and ways of working. So a number of reviews that are planned which aim to implement the operating model. Further in the paper, I've shared with you the methodology that we use to carry out these reviews. And those members that are familiar with transformation projects and IT projects in general will recognise, I've coloured them in blue, the four main elements of the method, which is to discover, to define, to develop and deliver. It's a well-known and well-used methodology provided by the Design Council, used by some 300 local authorities and many private sector organisations, and we have adopted it in Basildon. And included in the diagram on page 5 in pink are our standard project gateway steps, so that members can have visibility of those. So at the start of the project, we do an initiation document where we're scoping. Halfway through, we present an outline business case showing the benefits that can be realised. As we move from developing into delivering, we bring a full business case with the metrics and the return on investment. And then towards the end, we do a retrospective evaluation project closure. So that's what we're doing with the organisation strategy. That is supported, members, by our workforce and the skills and the capacity of our workforce to deliver. So in this update paper, there are a few paragraphs about the workforce strategy. Our workforce strategy contains 3 themes. We want to recruit the best people, we want to invest in their development, and we want to align what they do to make us a fit for purpose organisation. And I've included a few paragraphs in there about progress on a number of projects strategy. Just by way of quantifying those, we've made good progress on a review of how we recruit people, where we advertise, the use of social media, our branding, how we attract the best applicants. We have made good progress on our training and development offer. We've had 7 apprentices through the organisation over the last year. We've currently got 8 Kickstart work experience placements with us, and we're about to start cohort 2 with a further 9 Kickstarters. We've got 14 members of staff who've been through internal apprenticeship training in areas like planning, building control, digital skills, and we ran a host of different training, webinar, e-learning events over the course of the year to respond to remote and hybrid ways of working. So just a flavour there of how we are trying to make sure that we're able to attract, train and then retain talent in the organisation. And the final part in the update paper that I'd ask members to note is the IT strategy itself. Underpinning the changes to the ways of working and the skills in the organisation is a need to ensure that the hardware, the systems and the infrastructure that we use is fit for purpose. Members will be aware that there's been a wholesale replacement of hardware in the council over the last couple of years, 18 months, couple of years, and that prepared the organisation well for what was to come in the pandemic. Officers are now in receipt of Microsoft devices, and we have adopted the Microsoft platform as our main piece of infrastructure. We are migrating our legacy systems from their current operating arrangements onto Microsoft Dynamics, and we will continue to do that over the next year to 2 years. That reduces for us a series of risks to the organisation to do with outdated systems and outdated hardware. Members will see more council operations or systems operating in the cloud with less reliance on servers and all those bits of hardware, switches and cables that can and often do go wrong. The final part just to raise on IT is about members. We are working with members of the Scrutiny Committee to test and design councillor inquiry case management improvements, and that work will be commenced with members of the Scrutiny Committee midway through January to run through February. I would want to invite members of this committee also to take part in that testing if you have the capacity to do so. And Chairman, just the last thing to raise on IT is the council is always vigilant to be aware of its cybersecurity risks. This is a growing area of risk for all organisations, and hackers are becoming ever more sophisticated in their means of infiltrating organisations' systems and data. And we see on an almost daily basis stories of where customer information has been hijacked. We are putting in place a number of audits and cybersecurity arrangements to improve that position in the council, and we will, as part of that, want to talk with members about both the hardware that they use and the portal that we want to introduce for how councillors can access resident data. So in summary, Chair, this is a paper updating the committee about change. Change is a bumpy old road, and it's unlikely to always go smoothly. But I hope what I've done by way of introducing the item is to share with members that we've got resources in place, we've got the right skills, and we've got an investment and a commitment from members, senior managers and staff to making the resident experience for Basildon a more joined up and seamless one. And I'll stop there, Chair, if that's okay, to take some questions.
No, thank you, Stuart. I'm going to say I think you've under-egged it a little bit there, because in addition to all of those things that you've also got the right attitude. And what I mean by that is that putting the customer at the centre of what we do is a cultural thing. And the thing with cultural things is that the foundation of any culture is communication. It's the words we use, it's how we use them, it's what we say, and it's how we communicate. And on page 3, when we go through the background of this, and you've got the characteristics set out in the strategy, it doesn't say we'll try, we'll aspire, we'll strive, all the words that mean, well, we probably won't, but at least we're going to pay lip service to it. It actually says quite explicitly, we will. And it's that I think is one of the key components of change in any organisation, making the decision and being black and white about we will do this. And if you don't do it, then just being honest enough to say why it didn't work and where it went wrong. And I think if we start on that, as with anything else, then you've got an organisation which we can be proud of collectively. Having said that, Stuart Sullivan, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just ask the obvious question. obviously COVID has impacted not just the health of society, but also behaviour as well of people and organisations. So he doesn't actually mention it in the report, and I think you only briefly touched on it in your introduction there. But how has COVID, do you think, impacted the progress, the priorities, and the objectives of this plan? And you know, what do you? Does anything need to change, and what are you doing to address those changes? Thanks.
Chair, do you want me to come back on each point as they raise? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, why not?
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. So I think it's a point well raised. As I was mentioning in my introduction, we were fortuitous stroke well planned. Having planned for a rollout of new devices for staff and having chosen laptops as those new devices, we were in the fortunate position very early on in the pandemic, if we roll back 18 months or more, to be giving our staff the opportunity and the technology to be able to connect remotely. And that has been a massive step forward. Another big step forward has been and I know we all have our moments with Microsoft Teams, but it's been the largely intuitive interface that Microsoft Teams gives us. And that's enabled one-to-ones, team meetings, and service delivery for those staff who are not location specific to continue. We had a plan to roll out SharePoint and Teams that would have taken us over about an 18-month period, and it happened almost overnight. So we've had to run to catch up, Councillor Sullivan. It's a point well made, and that has meant a reprioritisation of our digital skills training, for example, onto things like SharePoint, whereas we probably would have stretched it out over a longer period. And that said, no better change agents than a pandemic to make everybody sit up and to listen and to be on board with the shared goal of keeping the show on the road. So it's in a strange way, it's been very positive for the change programme. So that's the plus sides. In terms of what we've had to reprioritise, we have looked again at our project plans for the timelines for some of the projects that we've been rolling out. And it is true that at the front end of a project, when we do the discovery part, we have had to work harder at the workshops to involve people who do the doing so that we can discover what works and what the pain points are, and therefore start to design a solution. And in the good old days of being in a room with post-it notes on a piece of brown paper on the wall, you can cover that off in a couple of hours. On a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, that becomes more difficult. So we have spent more time investing at the front end of the diagnostic piece. So lots of positives out of it, some challenges as well. And I think now the world of work is adjusting to a hybrid manner of working. So we're becoming more used to training being online, one-to-ones being online, and so on and so forth.
Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions and a couple of points that I wanted to make. A simple question on page 4, the operating model. What's a unified contact channel? Which hopefully is a fairly simple answer. And do you want me to run through the other points and let the officer deal with a lot of one go? Okay. And secondly, on page 6, talks about the workforce strategy, and in particular on the 4th paragraph down, talks about talent management and the recruitment of staff in some difficult disciplines. That's something I think we all recognise. To me, as a potential employer, there is nothing worse than ending up with a short list of one person. I'd rather not appoint to the job, because I don't know that I've got the best person for the job. So question there really relates to what are we doing to make ourselves the organisation or potential employer of choice? Yeah, I know if you work for Price Waterhouse or somebody like that, they get their choice of top graduates. I don't perhaps expect any local authority to compete with them, but we do want to be recruiting from the same pool of skills. And whatever discipline it happens to be, accountancy, planning, whatever else. You know, what can we do to make ourselves attractive? Is it something like, for example, offering a signing on fee to cover part of the tuition fees, for instance? Also, Mr. Young mentioned about joined up comms and joined up information. Completely behind that. But I just posed a question. Talked about the sharing of information between different parts of the council. I believe you mentioned in that benefits and sports as being a couple of the areas where information could share. And I was of the understanding that some sections of the council, in particular benefits, were subject to a Chinese wall between them and everywhere else because of the nature of the information they deal with. So I'd just like to be clear where we stand on that and where we stand with data protection on it. And the last couple of points are on the ICT. And we talked about Microsoft. And historically, we've had loads of bespoke systems which have been horrendously expensive to maintain, update, and so on. So I'd like to know whether this means that we'll be able to more economically update software in particular in the future. And finally, a question about the intranet versus the internet. I generally speak contact the council from home. I very rarely go into the office to use the computer. If I'm using the computer, I might as well deal with it here. But if I go onto the internet from home or receive a message, for example, an agenda, if it's got part 2 items on it, they will be on the intranet. They're not on the internet, and I have to ask officers to send the part 2 item through, which is no great hardship. But what can we do to make the intranet accessible to members from home? I can't access it unless others have got a magic tool to facilitate that. So sorry to have droned on a little bit, but hopefully those points are all clear.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. I'll take them in the order that you raised them, if that's okay. So unified contact channel. What I mean by that is, as I was explaining in the example, a resident might phone us or write to us or email us or walk into the BAS centre. In the future, it won't matter which one of those they use, or indeed, if they mix and match, the record will always tally back to M. Buckley or Mr. Buckley or Malcolm Buckley. In fact, that'll all be the same record. And so what we'll be able to see, which we can't see at the moment, is that resident wrote to us and then followed it up with 2 telephone calls and an email. And that's what I mean by unified. So it'll all join up. It'll all join up. Yeah. On the talent management issue about becoming a more attractive employer and an employer of choice, there are a number of things we're doing at the moment and a number of things that we can learn from others. So we are at the moment working very closely with county colleagues around how we promote some of the key job opportunities that come up. And we have, for example, run successful campaigns in our legal team, in our digital space as well, and in some of our employment HRE type spaces, by working with a larger employer who's got a bit more resource than us, so that we can access their social media accounts and other such places. So the first thing I'd say is it's quite fast moving and we need to be partnered up with the right people. I think the second thing is that we need to sell the benefits of working with Basildon, and that's a learning point for us. We need to be better at that. Basildon is generally a very friendly, welcoming, almost feels like a family when you come and work here. People ask about you, they ask about your well-being, and they look out for you. And not every employer is like that. Some employers are quite cold to work for, and we need to sell that a little bit more. It's one of our unique selling points. One of the ways that we do attract and keep talent is through the example that you gave, Councillor Buckley, which is to pay for people's tuition and to develop people. And I skipped over it for the sake of brevity. We've got a number of examples of where we have shortage areas and we are investing in people's career from an early stage. So an example in our planning service would be 2 apprentices who started with us doing BTEC courses and are now on the foundation stages of becoming professional planners. Now, those courses will take a number of years, as you'll be aware, to become a professional planner. And indeed, those individuals at some point may decide to follow a career somewhere else that isn't Basildon. However, we've got them for those years where they're studying. We've got their contribution, we've got their energy and their commitment, and they may well stay and become the next head of planning or director of growth. It's possible, and we know that staff do stay at Basildon and work their way all the way up the hierarchy. And indeed, we've got at least one of those people on the call tonight. And indeed, our own chief exec has worked his way up. So,
which one you're talking about?
Yes. So it does happen. It does happen at Basildon. So career paths and development are some of the ways that we try to attract talent. And I could talk for a long time about talent management. So maybe I'll just leave it there for the sake of brevity. Your point is very, very well made about the joined up information and the divisions that need to happen between sensitive information. And maybe I should have used a different example, because what I was trying to get across was that the customer record will be one record for each person. We will build into that record the divisions of the detail of that information that is shared. So you're quite right. I mean, an extreme example would be a domestic abuse record should never be shared beyond that immediate team unless there is a good operational need for it to be shared, and it will never be. Whereas Stuart Young phoning up to say, I believe somebody's fly tipped at the end of the road is something that could be shared with other services. And so what we're doing in designing the case management solution is to think about those divisions of information at the moment. It's a point well made. Thank you for raising it. You talked about legacy ICT bespoke systems and the cost of maintaining them. And hasn't that been an industry for a long time for some big companies, that once you're bought into their system, you are locked into ever increasing maintenance and upgrade costs? One of the reasons that this council adopted Microsoft as a platform is that it is a little bit like the IT equivalent of buying a big bucket of Lego bricks. And the market is rich with people who will construct the modules in Microsoft. So we are no longer reliant on one or two dominant providers of IT systems for areas. We can now test the market, as we have done with case management, and we are working with a provider who's building us a case management system in Microsoft. When we move on to, say, the financial management system, we will probably appoint a different provider. It will still be a Microsoft product, and we will still be able to swap and change who provides to it. And that's the way the market has matured. We are actively seeking to move away from those legacy systems over a period of time. We need to make sure it's safe to do that, because there are serious service risks as we change system. We have also made assumptions in our medium-term financial strategy and the IT strategy about those moves. So they are hardwired into what we're doing over the next couple of years. And then finally, you raised the issue about member access. You were raising an issue about internet and the different ways that we publish and share information. We are working on a member portal. We would like that portal to replace a number of ways into the council for members, including how we share agenda documentation, how we deal with member inquiries, how we deal with resident inquiries. So it is included in the case management project, the first one we're doing. And in mid-January, we will be testing out some of those pages with your colleagues on the scrutiny committee. So hopefully that gives you some assurance, if not perhaps the complete answer to the various questions that you raised.
Thanks very much for such a comprehensive response.
Thank you. Tony.
Thank you, Leader. Forgive me if I'm a little bit more cynical than Mr. Young, but my experience over the last 20 years is that the operating systems that these companies sell you licenses for are not always maintained long term. And we've spent a small fortune on ICT over the years. And I hope this time that the modern alchemists in IT that promise to change lead into gold tomorrow are going to support these systems long term. I suspect that we will be spending considerable sums of money maintaining whatever IT systems we have. But moving on, I think it's the 5th paragraph on page 6, you talk about additional skills and improving performance, but I can't see anywhere in the policy document where we're talking about succession planning. And if I can give an example, you could have an extremely talented planning officer that is very good at the technical side of their job, but may not make a good manager or head of service in that particular area. And are we as a council using things like assessment centres or giving that opportunity for employees to develop the skills for the sort of promotions that they may wish to apply for?
Thank you, Councillor Headley. So I think two quite different questions and observations there. I would agree with you that the inherited position that we have is a difficult technical position with the legacy systems. There are greater and lesser degrees of technical maintenance and support for the systems that we operate in this council at the moment. And we are prioritising, in fact, I've got an event coming up next week to go back over this. We are prioritising and reprioritising which order we migrate from the legacy systems by looking at the state of maintenance of those systems. So you are very right, Councillor Headley, to raise the point about going in eyes wide open as to what we're going from, but also what we're going to. So we are putting our eggs in the basket of Microsoft. We have adopted that as a council-wide platform. There are efficiencies to be had in that, and there are benefits, as I've explained, in terms of customer records to be had from that. We are also banking on Microsoft being a sufficiently large, global, long-standing product for it to survive in the marketplace over time. It is a mature market in terms of providers of Microsoft build. So we're not planning to partner with a single implementation provider. As I was saying in response to Councillor Buckley's questions, we are actively looking to partner with more than one implementation partner over time, so that we're not reliant on any one company for updates and maintenance. That said, Councillor Headley, you're right to raise it. It remains as a risk, and a risk that we must mitigate and manage, and that is the risk of maintenance and of staying up to date with both the system, the process that we use to operate the system, and the data that's in it. Any one of those three things can cause us a service operational challenge unless we stay on top of them. On to your second point about succession planning, I've used the term talent management in this paper very widely. I take your point, however, when we look at talent management, we are also looking at the demographic of our workforce, and we're looking at age, we're looking at turnover in particular disciplines and areas, and we're looking at career path opportunities and what the competition's offering. So your example in planning is a very good example. There is a high demand for planners. We can develop planners and they can move on elsewhere. Equally, your point about the balance of requirement in a job between things which are technical in a job and things which are more generic, like management, budget, stakeholder management, etc., can change as you move up a hierarchy. We have just looked into revising our management development programme, and we're looking to partner with a couple of other Essex authorities who are already running successful programmes to launch a programme come spring, or relaunch a programme come spring, to look just at the points you raised, Councillor Headley, around how do you take somebody who's proficient technically and make them a great leader and a great budget manager, and that they stay with Basildon. So I think two very worthwhile challenges that you raised. Thank you.
Jack.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Young, for taking us through the report. I just wanted to come back to some of the earlier questions and some of the earlier points of your presentation around what this means for residents' involvement and engagement with us. That so much of resident inquiries that come to us as councillors and that come to the council are not just council inquiries on their own. They quite often work and need other organisations, other local authorities or statutory services. Now, we share a building with the DWP. We work in partnership with other organisations. What involvement have they had with this new model going forward? Or is that something to follow?
So we are involving partners in the discovery workshops that we're running. In particular, if I'm honest, probably less DWP, more county. So what we're looking at the moment is the handoffs between us and county. And as you know, we share space on highways, lighting, on things like the built environment, and some tipping and estates management and so on and so forth. So we have reached out to county about trying to build solutions that minimise disruption when the query is shared between us. DWP, if I'm honest, slightly harder nut to crack in that they've got some very defined processes wrapped around how they work. We do have contact. You're right. We have the benefit of sharing the space, the building when we're in, and we've got good connections between our customer service colleagues and the DWP colleagues in the building. So we will look to build on those relationships as we move forward, Councillor. As I suppose the honest answer is, it's one that we need to build in more into the programme.
Thank you, Stuart. I don't see anybody else indicating, so I think that hopefully you've got enough input there from members on that particular item. So we move on to item 4, which is update on the Langdon Community Centre. Is that Paul or Leslie?
It's a double act.
Oh, hooray.
So I'm going to pick up on the property aspects, if that's okay, and Paul will pick up on the community aspects. So report slightly out of date because it was going to come earlier, as you know, in December. So good news, centre is now open. Phase 1 works all successfully completed. The association and residents are very happy with the work that's been completed, as are members who've actually visited the centre, and that's credit really to the Basildon team led by Mr Humphreys, Morgan Sindel, and indeed the association themselves, and the huge input that they had right through that work. I think going forward, there's a maintenance programme in place to ensure that we keep it at the standard that we have it in now. Obviously, that's responsibility of the association, but the council will undertake a number of compliance tasks which are detailed in the report. At the request of the community association, as you know, attention was focused, apart from the broader areas as the health and safety matters, was focused on particular areas of the building. That was the foyer, the lounge, the main hall, and the function room and office, and they've all been successfully completed now and fully in use. There's a couple of grant applications which we're waiting the outcomes on, and one of those is for changing places, and the other is for the heating system, replacement of the system as part of our net zero agenda. So that's we're hoping we will hear on that very shortly. The building, as I say, is fully compliant now and is warm and providing much needed community space. There's a full repairing lease in place, a 25-year lease, and we will absolutely continue to support the ongoing development of the association to ensure that they are successful going forward, of course. And in terms of just touching on the budget implications, so obviously there was £1 million allocated for phase 1, and that allocation has been spent. And as you will recall, back in July last year, we brought a report, and the overall estimate of cost was 2.2 million. And the next stage, really, we've got an allocation of 1.2 million included in next year's budget, and work is ongoing at the moment looking at what that next phase will look like, and indeed the detailed specification and cost for that, which will come back to a future committee. So that's really what the next steps are, really, to work with the association to make sure that we get that next phase brought back to committee for decision. And I think Paul's going to give you an update on the association side and how they're getting on and the activities.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, just to assure members, as we would with any other community group taking one of our buildings, is a process we go through, and that's detailed here with the items that we would check before giving the green light for the lease to be signed. And as I gave an update at the Community and Wellbeing Committee, certainly the new association has worked very hard to get that documentation in place, have been listening to us, as well as working with the CVS and working with the Charity Commission and others to fully understand what their responsibilities are and putting together quite a robust plan. I say robust, but obviously it's a new dawn for Langdon, so it is never going to be easy to open up a new building. But certainly the reports that I've had direct from the association is they've had a good Christmas. They have a reasonably full booking table, so they are looking forward to a very busy January. And the good news is the activity centre will be moving back into the site over this week and next. And I think Councillor Sargent will be visiting there on the 14th of January to ensure that the activity members settle back into the building. So it has been very positive, certainly lots of good feedback from those going into the centre. I've been there myself a couple of times, and certainly it is a bit of a hive of activity. So generally speaking, early days, it's looking very good. Obviously, there's a long way to go. And certainly, as Leslie said, the second stage of getting the rest of the building open, which we will be working with the activity centre and the association to make sure that we have an activity centre in the site that will be fit for future, because we're expecting lots of people wanting to return over the next couple of months to activity. So we need to get working on that. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you both, and again my thanks to all the officers and everybody that's been involved in this project right from the get-go. It's been really good work all round, and this isn't going to be political, I promise, because this is an informal meeting. We wouldn't do politics at an informal meeting, would we? But I was fortunate enough to have been invited to the opening, and while I was there, an elderly lady came up to me, and she's apparently one of the local characters around there, and she was sharing with me her experiences of having gone there first of all as a child, right the way through to the venerable age she's currently at, and the weddings that she'd been to, the funerals, the wakes, and everything else. And that thing brings it home what these buildings are about, not just in Langdon, but right across the board. They are about the communities and the people in those communities. The building may be bricks and mortar, but the people that go to them and the reasons they go to them are the human side, the residents that we represent. And that was quite heartening to hear and to remind, as a reminder of what it is we're about when we have these centres. And they also very kindly then, the conversation with some of them went around the COVID pandemic issue. And, you know, fair play to them. They said, look, if this building was needed as far as a vaccination centre or to support the new Omicron breakout, you know, we're here and we'll do whatever we can to help you. And that again is the community working with the council working with the community, which is the relationship that we all really want to ensure that we engender going forward. So it's a positive community story with a positive community spirit, backed up by the hard work of officers, and I thank everybody that was involved in it. Haven't seen anybody else indicate to speak on this item. Oh, Jack.
And Councillor Smith was before me, Mr. Chairman, so happy to. Oh,
sorry, I didn't see Kerry. Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's just a few points, like in your vein, I won't make it political because these political points have been made at other committee meetings. But I would reiterate on the record that it would be nice to finally see how the council got to pick the association it chose. It would be helpful, and also the business plan. But that's what I will say on that point. Now, I don't know if you're privy, Mr. Chairman, as a borough councillor. Last week, Essex County Council sent to all members a report produced by former MP Justin Greening on Essex County Council's levelling up. And when you scroll through this very short document, it states the ward in most need of levelling up in the country, not Essex, the country. And I was surprised, absolutely surprised, using their calculation, but nevertheless, it states it's Langdon Park ward. Now, we only have a partially reopened building, which is the bar, the main hall and toilets. Now, my colleague, Councillor Ferguson, did table a motion at this committee in the summer, and I did support it, to allocate the full funding. Now, if that is the case, that Langdon Park is the ward within the United Kingdom that needs Boris Johnson's flagship policy of levelling up the most, what are you as leader going to have conversations with Essex and hopefully Justin Greening and Michael Gove, the minister dealing with it, to ensure that this council is supported with levelling up funding to get this building fully reopened?
Well, thanks, Kerry. I mean, a couple of things on that. First of all, as you know, and as members will know, it's not council policy to pick committees for groups that want to run facilities. The committees form themselves. What the council does is facilitate those committees to ensure that they've got the knowledge base, the skill base, and to make sure they're supported in any aspirations they have. But it isn't council policy to actually select a committee or to pick a committee anywhere in the borough. So we just wouldn't do that. With regard to a business plan, officers have had a look at a business plan. The whole point about sinking money into any building and to want to see it thrive is to ensure that there is a business plan that's in place that we believe in. But what I do believe is that you can assess a business plan, but a council isn't a bank, and a council shouldn't be a bank. And therefore the skill set involved in setting a profit and loss account and a business plan is again down to that committee, making sure they've got the skill sets and supporting them where needed. The key thing is the diligence of how you follow through with the accounts and to make sure the proper accounting is in place, to make sure that when you've got any organisation that they're running any building in a responsible manner and the money is being allocated in the right way. And that's what comes in with the ongoing due diligence that I'd expect us to be doing in every community centre right the way across the borough. But with regards to Langdon Park, it's interesting. So the Echo ringed me and they were of the opinion it was Langdon Hills. I said, I can't believe it's Langdon Hills. It's the most deprived area in the borough. But I could believe that Langdon Park has been identified in that regard. And I did have a meeting with Justin Greening on levelling up. And we raised exactly that point, that as far as I was concerned, I was very happy for Basildon to fly the flag and drive forwards on levelling up, but that did mean that it would require buy-in from the government and support from the government in achieving those aims. Quite disappointingly, her comments at the time were, well, you know, it's hard to get government to move and it's hard to get government to change. And I found that incredibly dispiriting and well, it wasn't a good comment that I would have expected when we're talking about something which is high up on a government agenda. But whatever the government decide to do or not to do, what I can promise you is we will be espousing the levelling up agenda and pushing it forward, especially for the residents of Langdon Park, and we will push for whatever support, be it via MPs or lobbying direct, that's needed. And if that means having more conversations with Justin Greening, then that's what we'll do as well. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's about representing people. Kerry, you wanted to come back. Did you? Or was that just saying, well done?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's helpful to give us the feedback about your meeting with Justin Greening. But with the greatest of respect, as you know, this government's got elected on the promise of delivering Brexit done. It's been stung with COVID. Hopefully, we're now turned a corner. So the main flagship policy left is levelling up. So as the statistics Essex County Council has drawn, that Langdon Park is the ward in most need of levelling up. As the leader of the council, Mr. Chairman, would you invite the Prime Minister or Michael Gove to come to Langdon if this is now their flagship policy? So if when they finally get to work on this, once COVID's behind them, which hopefully will be soon, this is where the place they need to be. This is the place they need to come. And when you read that document, it's pretty clear the people of Langdon want a community centre. So I think the government needs to put their hand in their pocket and stand by their word and back up this council. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you for that. I'll always take that under advisement. And of course, this item is about the Langdon Centre as opposed to levelling up agenda. And of course, that is a separate item which we'll be addressing in the course of time. But thanks, Kerry. Jack, did you say you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to come in on the previous discussion, I've asked, as members will be aware, previous questions at different service committees around levelling up, and I've been disappointed with the response from government. And it's as if we're finally learning what 10 years of a Conservative government is doing. My view has always been that if the government want to level up, they've got to pay up. And that is something that we haven't seen of late. But I will come back to Langley Community Centre and the report here. Just a couple of points for clarification, if I may, and then I've got some further supplementaries that I wish to ask afterwards. So, Mr. O'Shea, Mr. Brace, thank you for taking us through the report there. Can I just clarify which rooms are currently, and first of all, may I say, I'm pleased to see Langley Community Centre open. I recognise how important community centres are for residents, and I want to see them well used. So with that in mind, can I just clarify which rooms are currently available for use and which rooms are coming into phase 2? We refer to phase 1 and phase 2 quite a lot, but I just want clarity on what is available within phase 1 and what it comes within phase 2.
So phase 1 is the rooms that I've just gone through. So the foyer, the lounge, stroke bar, the main hall, the function room and the office are all fully operational now. So that was phase 1, plus the other works around fire safety, legionellas, etc. All of that, and everything else will fall into later phases to be determined. So that's the next conversation. What's the next phase of work to look like? And that will obviously be to benefits to help the income of the association as well. So it'll be based on, what's the best place to put that investment in next.
And sorry, Councillor, in addition to that, we've also got a bid in to replace the heating system from a government grant and a bid in for a change in places facility at the site as well. So there's what would be the council funded stuff and also the externally funded stuff that we're looking at.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chairman, just another point of clarification and supplementaries afterwards. Thank you, Mr. O'Shea, Mr. Brace, for the responses there. So what activities, just in line with the rooms that the current or the proposed developments in phase 2, what activities can't currently go ahead because the development hasn't taken place? And just in relation to the heating system that you mentioned, Mr. Brace, what situation is the current heating system within the centre? We're hearing, and we're going through a cost of living crisis at the moment with rising heating bills. What does that actually mean in terms of the current heating system over there?
Well, certainly on activity, the things that cannot operate mostly at the moment is around the full service of the activity centre. And there will be some clubs that can't meet if it can't be fitted into the main hall or the function room as their normal. So there is some being displaced, but as I say, the activity centre is going back and they're reworking their timetable to use the space to its maximum. So it's obviously not in full operation. So there are some people that can't return. In terms of the heating system, it is fine, it is serviceable, it is working, but as we've said in a number of reports, it is coming to the end of its useful life, and therefore a decarb grant is in for that to try and get it replaced by air source heat pumps, so which are far more are seen as a far better solution for industrial buildings such as Langley Community Centre. So we are hopefully we'll get the response to that in the next month or so, and then a plan to install that. So in terms of the gas usage, obviously we've only had a month at this stage, and we'll be catching up with the association to see what those bills are like. But yeah, it's the same for every community centre in the borough currently.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the point of the heating, just in terms of timescales that we're, by the sounds of it, when the heating system, if we get funding approved, and I hope it does, it'll be going in the spring at a time when we've just come through the cold weather season. Is that something that could have been done beforehand to put in the funding application to have had a new heating system in place for the winter season when it was most needed?
No, currently the supply of replacement of anything is particularly slow, and even more so in the decarbonisation arena. We are still in the process of procuring for the Basildon Centre because there is a lack of supply. So we would not have been able to get a heating system into Langdon. If we'd have waited, we would still be waiting to open Langdon Community Centre. So the answer to that, although we may have wanted to, we would not have been able to deliver it with the current supply chain.
Thank you, Mr. Brace. Mr. Chairman, I've got some supplementary questions directed to yourself, really, and it's just in response to your conversation with Councillor Smith there around tendering processes and deciding on the specific partner. And you mentioned that the council doesn't choose a particular organisation to work with; they form themselves. I'm a little bit bemused by that remark, really. That for any organisation, for any building that we're providing people, we need to make sure we've got the right organisation running it. And they could be. I've not met them. I've not been involved in any processes. I've not been invited to the launch event as yourself. And I hope I do get to be able to be invited to Langdon Community Centre and to see the work there that's carried out. But we've got to make sure we're working with the right organisation. And you mentioned that they form themselves. So what happens in the case of where there could potentially be two organisations that put themselves forward for wanting to run the community centre, or people that have got previous experience running community centres that might want to run a community centre like this? Why haven't we followed that process, Mr. Chairman?
Well, you say it's a question to me, but I'm going to ask the officers that question.
In the unlikely event that we have a queue of associations wanting to take a building, which I'm trying to remember the last time we would have had more than one, can't remember one, so I can't draw it from my memory, if it were to happen, then we would encourage those groups to work together, because ultimately we are not leasing a building for whatever they wish to use it for. The misconception is we are leasing a building for them to operate what they want to operate, but ultimately it is a community centre, and the vast majority of its operation should be offering it for community groups and other activities to take place in it. So we're asking someone to run a community centre, not take their service into the building and fill it. So our first primary form of attack to get someone to take a building is to ask for members of the local community to come forward. Most of those that come forward usually have some form of experience, and certainly that's not been any different with some of the individuals that have come forward with Langdon Community Centre, have experience of business, have experience of the building's operation, are fully aware of how a community centre should be operating, and not in the case of all of them, they do have some experience of bar operation, which is obviously useful for Langdon. So they have come forward with experience. And certainly, you're absolutely right, Councillor, we must make sure that they are capable of doing it. And that's why we have gone through the process of making sure we have seen all of their operational plans, how they intend to work, what their financial plan is, all those things to ensure they are eyes wide open going in as much as we are eyes wide open going in. It is a new building. We know there will be a risk. But ultimately, we try to ensure with any new group that's going into our buildings that they've provided as much evidence that gives us comfort that they at least have a good semblance of knowledge to operate that building.
Thank you, Mr. Brace. I did direct my questions to you, Mr. Chairman. You are the leader of the council, and thought it was only reasonable that you were able to respond to that. I do appreciate Mr. Brace.
And that's absolutely fine. But as you well know, as leader of the council, I don't micromanage. I don't get involved in the day-to-day activities of every single department of the council. We had done very well up until now, but you alluded to the government putting its hand in its pockets on levelling up. I think that you'd be hard pushed to find anybody in the community that doesn't recognise the fact the government has been putting its hand in its pockets all over the place to respond to the COVID pandemic, and has done a very, very good job with regards to that. When it comes to levelling up, that's another issue, and that will be taken forward as the government gets to grips with its finances and hopefully runs a tight and fiscal operation nationally. When it comes to Langdon Centre itself, I'm sure that I speak for the Langdon people here, that they would wish that maybe you'd paid more interest to the Langdon Centre when you were polishing up the wrecking balls, rather than actually trying to micromanage them by rote after the fact now.
Mr. Chairman, as we both know, that's not true. But I will continue with my line of questioning. Although I note that you've given a different remark to me there about levelling up to those that you wrote in your letter to the MPs and to the Echo last week when you were complaining about the lack of support that we got from government. So just really to get to the crux of this issue here, that we had a community centre that needed investment. It needed significant work's being done to it, and I'm not casting aspersions on any organisation that comes forward to run it. Did we have a competitive tender process to be able to run that centre? And was previous experience of running community centres part of the criteria? So I'm just looking at the pages 12 and 13, and I don't see any relation to competitive tender or previous experience.
I think that you totally missed the point that Mr. Brace raised. We have never ever done a competitive tender for any organisation wanting to run or get involved in a community centre, and there is no need to do so. What we do is do a process of working with an organisation, and of course, if we found out that an organisation somehow failed that fit for purpose, there would be conversations with officers and that organisation with regards to how we would manage that. There is not such a thing as a competitive tender process for any organisation that wishes to run a community centre. In the same way as there's no competitive tendering operation for any shadow council, any parish council, any of the smaller councils that we have within the borough. There is a process where people put themselves forward, and then we work with those people as we go. If there had been a queue of people all lining up or wanting to do it, I'm sure that we would have come to a methodology for having such a process, but there wasn't. We don't normally do it, and therefore that's the answer to that.
It wasn't, Mr. Chairman, because you didn't give them the opportunity in the first place to be able to come forward and say they want to run it.
Well, interestingly, Jack, we've had 5,000 people on Facebook that were involved in the people that were pro the Langdon Centre, and funny enough, you'd have thought that if there were 5,000 people and all of them wanted to run it, we might have had somebody that said, oh, we'd have liked to have had a crack at that. We've had no communication from anybody at all saying we would like to have been given an opportunity, not one. So therefore, it's a very, very spurious comment you're going from. I'm not so sure where you're trying to come from with this. As I say, maybe if you'd have taken more interest when you were trying to knock it down, rather than now trying to micromanage. Now it's been
absolutely not true, Mr. Chairman, as you well know.
Then we'd be,
as you well know, Mr. Chairman, that is very much not true.
Well, it pretty much is.
That is absolutely not true. There was never any plans to, and this was just misconceptions and spreading the truth as far as you possibly can on election leaflets at the time.
I think that if you went to the Langdon Centre to saw the state it was in after your previous leader had actually got the wrecking crew in, you'd see exactly where it was. But we're not going to get into an argument with it because
once
it is
again,
what it
not
is.
True. Not true.
Totally true. Ask 5,000 residents of Langdon whether they think it's true or not.
So why have we not been able to do the business plan, Mr. Chairman?
Again, there is a business plan, but it's not for us as a committee to micromanage a business plan of a community. We don't do that with any of the others, and we treat all of the community in the same way. What we do is we have professional officers who will go through with community reviews and go through associations, organisations that run centres, and if officers then raise a concern, then that would actually go through the correct processes to inform a committee or whatever that there are concerns, but there wasn't. They have a business plan. Officers were satisfied with it. In fact, officers were very, very diligent. At a number of points, they came to me with initial concerns they had with regards to the formation of the committee, with regards to taking it forwards, and those were addressed with the committee as a way of driving it forward. And that's the correct and proper way of doing it.
Now, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that I want to see Langdon Community Centre be a success. And for it to be a success, we all need to make sure the right systems are there, the right organisation, and they could be. Like I say, I'm not casting any aspersions on any organisation that's involved in Langdon Community Centre. But clearly, work needed to be done. And I pride myself on being part of an administration for 2 years when this was a member-led authority and members made the decisions. And we would put it out to...
Well, one member did.
We would put it out to a competitive tender to be able to make sure we've got the right organisation running the centre, to be able to make sure we've got something to compare something with, and we've got a track record to be able to base a decision on. But we've had no member oversight, we've had no competitive tender, and we've had no business plan. That gives us no confidence as a committee that the right decisions have been taken at the right time on Langdon Community Centre. And let's be fair, if we were to believe you 6 months ago, when you stood up in full council in the AGM and said it would be open at the end of June, it wasn't. You said it'd be open at the end of July. It wasn't. You said it'd be open at the end of September. It wasn't. And then it was the beginning of December when part of it was finally open. So I won't take any lectures from you. about members and the decision-making process that we've followed on Langdon Community Centre.
Well, you might want to take some lectures, because if it had been in your administration's remit, the answers to, is it open? No, it's being knocked down. Is it open? No, it's being knocked down. Is it open? No, it's being knocked down. Is it open? Oh, no, it's gone, because we're building flats on it. So that's the difference between our administration and yours. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The residents of Langdon now have a community centre they're proud of. It's doing very, very well. Thank you very much. And they're over the moon. And I think that's where we will end this particular item, except for Tony Headley, who maybe has some words of wisdom to add.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask the officer, I've not been involved with the Langdon Centre in any way, shape or form, but my understanding through other community associations is that they form a charitable trust and they are regulated, they have elections for officers, their finances are regulated. Is it the case that the community association now running Langdon Centre have achieved similar charitable status and come under those regulations?
I can confirm that, Councillor. Yes, they are. Well, there's two companies. There's a trading company and there is the charitable arm. Obviously, the trading company operates the bar, but all profits go to the charity.
I think the reason for that is that to obtain their charitable status, they can't hold a licence. That's why they have a trading. So this is regularised in exactly the same way as other large community centres.
Yes.
I think that answers the question of how this association was able to come forward and take on a very onerous full repairing lease.
Yes.
So I think there's some comfort in it that it's been properly constituted. It's met all the requirements in terms of financial probity, and it is a formally constituted charitable trust. Thank you.
No, thank you, Tony. I mean, it's quite clear that Councillor Ferguson doesn't trust the people of Langdon, doesn't trust the committee that's there setting it up, doesn't trust the officers to run it, because as was the want with his administration in a previous life, it was about, we know best, we know everything, and you don't, and the residents have proven that. Kerry, last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to get into a spat between Labour and the Conservatives, but there are some points I wish to disagree and take the point Councillor Ferguson has alluded to, but to take it further. The Facebook page you refer to, there was only one-sided comments. Anyone who said anything contrary, comments removed. There was the home address of the former leader publicised. It led to an incident where the police were called out. Now, I do not want to see that happening to any member of the council. And one of the persons there was also issuing illegal election material. And he's now a member of that call. Now, I want that community centre with its new management to be a success. But where there's doubts, it looks like a political favour. You're 16 weeks away from election. Shut us up in the opposition. Okay, there's the process. There it is. You shut up, bang the rights. If you do that, we will shut up on this point. But it just looks too cosy. That's what we're getting at. And I won't say no further because I just want to keep it to the point and get into a political ding-dong.
Well, no, thank you for raising that. And to put your minds at ease, and I don't think it's a secret. And if it was a secret, it won't be after now. That's why I commissioned an independent investigation into everything that went on with the Langdon Centre, including all of the allegations made by the former leader. We currently have an independent investigator who's initiated that process and has started interviews. And both the leader of the Labour group and yourself will be interviewed in due course to ensure that everything is being done in a proper and transparent manner. So that will hopefully address all of the issues that everybody seems to have a concern about at this particular point in time.
Mr.
Moving
Chairman,
on to the next item.
Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can that all be held in the public domain and everything published?
That will be down to the independent investigator, but as far as I'm concerned, in the interest of transparency, I would welcome the whole of it being published, because I'm sure there will be interesting reading, especially for the people of Langdon.
I agree.
So, moving on to item 5 on that bombshell, the draft budget general fund including a review of fees and charges. And this is Richard here, or is there somebody else presenting this? Is it you, Owen?
Richard, yes, thank you.
Over to you, Owen.
Thank you. This report provides information on the draft budget for the committee for next financial year, 22-23, and the forecast through to 25-26. The budget setting process and budget guidelines were approved by the Resources and Commercial Committee on the 14th of July 2021, and the budget started from page 15 of the agenda being produced following that process and those guidelines. An extract of the capital programmes from the projects relevant to the committee is included at page 51 of the agenda. Again, the committee is asked to endorse the revenue budget and capital proposals for inclusion in the overall budget that will be presented to Resources and Commercial Committee on the 8th of February. A schedule of fees and charges applicable to Services Coverage Committee is presented from page 31 of the agenda. We're discussing ways, really, given the current arrangements around hybrid remote meetings, how these can be approved, and we'll bring that forward, discuss that with Councillor Sullivan shortly. The fees and charges have been set in accordance with the fees and charges scheme approved by Commercialisation and Future Finance Subcommittee on the 19th of November 2020, and the committee is asked to review these charges and feed any comments forward. At Resources and Commercial Committee in February, the strategies for managing the future overall financial position of the authority will be considered. Again, there have been a number of briefings to assist members' understanding of some of the more technical aspects of the overall budget, and hopefully they've been helpful to members in consideration. And colleagues from relevant services are present, and collectively we're happy to answer any questions you may have on aspects of the budgets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Owen. On this, just for members, so that again, looking at the report, recommendation 2, obviously because the nature of this committee is removed, because we can't approve anything because we are not in a position to be able to do that. So the only items really are item 1 and item 3 in the recommendations, which are essentially noting, and any comments will be passed on. And this will be voted on at the subsequent Resources and Commercial Committee in due course. Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate the whole budget will eventually end up before council, and if there are any changes, that's the right place for them. But I just wanted to ask a question actually on part of the schedule at the back on page 49, which relates to borough filming charges. And I'd just like a little bit of clarity as to what one defines as a filming charge. And I say that because in the past, as you know, I've been the subject of national media, which has been not just news, but I've had a couple of documentary programs following me around at different times. Is this intended just for what I would loosely call feature films? Does it have a wider range than that? And I'm just minded of the fact that if one does get publicity for the borough through the likes of a feature film, it can actually be positive for the local economy.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So this is really looking at more sort of features as opposed to sort of interviews, where the filming crews actually come down to the borough and actually have a feature as such. And I think again, it's about a way of us managing really what film crews and what is happening within the borough in that respect, but also a chance to raise some revenue. But again, I think, you know, I think it says here as well, if under location fee per day, if it's going to be significant filming over a period of time, then there'll be a negotiation and conversation with that broadcasting company, and we could take into account what benefits that might have to the wider borough as part of that discussion.
Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got just a couple of points of clarification and some questions for yourself, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. So just my point of clarification, just on page 18, we've got the order of schedule of committees approving budgets. You'll be aware that we weren't able to approve the housing and estate renewal budget at the meeting in November, so that had to be deferred. I know that it's got on here the 18th of January. That meeting's now been cancelled. When will that have the opportunity to review the budget for the Housing and Estate Renewal Committee?
Well, my understanding is it hasn't been cancelled. It's been brought forward and it's taking place on Wednesday.
With the budget item as part of that?
You'd have to speak to the appropriate chairman. As you know, we have a committee system, so the chairman would be able to answer that. It's Councillor Schrader if you're not sure as to who to contact.
Fulwell, who's the chair of the committee. I'm just looking at the agenda. I can't see the item. And I will stand corrected if I'm wrong on that, but I don't believe I am. I see.
Well, you'll be able to take it up with the You'll be able to take it up with him at that committee as to why it's not on the agenda.
Just want to make sure we're getting everything approved in time for the budget, Mr. Chairman. This is the last policy executive meeting that will be held before the budget being presented to full council. So this is the last opportunity that this committee has to be able to shape the council's intention with regards to council tax. We have a cost of living crisis, we've got high energy prices. Can you confirm what the current position is of the administration with regards to council tax going forward in the next financial year?
Absolutely, I can confirm that you will find that out on budget night, as we always do. And of course, you have the opportunity to work with officers to present an alternative budget, which I'm sure you will, because I know you take a very deep interest in this sort of thing. And we look forward to the alternative budget being presented by the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was actually asking to be helpful so that we could calm residents' fears of what might happen after April.
I think residents will only be fearful when people spread fear around.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to the item with regards to member services. I note, so it's on page 26, democratic representation. I note there are two lines, supplies and services and management and administration. Mr. Smarts, could you confirm the difference between those two lines and what relates to what, please?
1 second, Councillor, if you can, please.
Look at Wesley.
The management administration, that's just the support recharges, whereas the supplies and services is actually the basically members' allowances, training and support, and employees' costs. That's the national insurance aspect of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Sparks. Where does could you just be clear with me around which line members' allowances and special responsibility allowances?
That's the supplies and services line.
Thank you. Could you just outline why there is an increase of £25,000 over the duration of the budget, please?
That would be inflationary assumptions. Whether that will obviously come through will be dependent and agreed each year as part of annual council, but that's an inflationary assumption at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Sparks. Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you'll agree with me that now is not the right time for any member allowances to be increasing at the cost of the taxpayer. So could we rule that out?
No, we can't. We have an independent remuneration committee. We have always been guided by the independent remuneration committee, and we will continue to be minded by the independent remuneration committee. But as it's a bit of a moot point anyway, because as you know, we intend to move to a cabinet system, hooray, as from May next year, and therefore these would change in that regard anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's once again very presumptuous, but we'll see the outcome of the elections within May. And I hope that there is no increase in the cost of councillors across the borough, that residents should not have to pay more for us.
On spirit, I totally agree with you. I think that what the residents do want is they want to see a well-managed council. They want to see an administration that is listening to them rather than running roughshod over them. They want to hear a council that is responsive to the needs. We've demonstrated so far that we will fulfill our election promises rather than just make them and then worry about it later. So we will continue to do that. And yes, we will indeed see come May what the public think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And they also want to see a council that can pass its budget, and Housing and Estate Renewal wasn't able to pass its budget at the last meeting. The Communities and Wellbeing Committee wasn't able to pass its budget at its last meeting, and we still have no budget coming forward for either of those service committees. So if the situation arises, will you call for an extraordinary meeting of this committee to be able to approve and be able to put forward budget recommendations for those service committees that have failed to be able to do so?
No, because you've highlighted the flaws of the committee system, and thank you for it. Another reason why we will move to a cabinet system. But the flaws of the committee system notwithstanding, we have an incredibly capable chairman, soon to be cabinet member of resources. And in that regard, we will get the budget through. It will go to council. It will be our budget. And I deeply, deeply look forward to your alternative budget and hearing your proposals. Nobody else indicating on that item, so I hope that officers have got the appropriate steer or noting as we needed from the thing. Oh, Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to make the brief point on page 16 that it says there was an identified budget gap of 1.7 million that had to be addressed. That, of course, is a figure including a 2% increase on council tax. So if in fact we were minded to freeze council tax, for example, that would mean that we would have to address a £2 million budget cap that we inherited. Thank you.
Oh, just to be clear, so we inherited that from the previous administration. Is that what you're saying, Councillor Sullivan?
Correct.
Oh, okay, thank you. Jack?
Thank you,
Want
Mr.
to
Chairman.
apologise to residents for that budget gap we inherited? Is that why you indicated?
Well, we inherited 4.2 from yourselves. So if you want to apologise for the lack of your government support for local authorities, which is what I was going to come on to, I took great interest in your letter to members of Parliament and your comments within the Echo last week, complaining about the lack of support that we've received as a local authority and threatening that we'll have to cut services. Like I say, it's almost as if you've learned what 11 years of the Conservative government has done to local authorities in the first place. So I'd like to see you apologise for putting forward Conservative governments time and time again that have failed the people of Basildon, have failed our area that has led to this situation in the first place. So with that in mind, could you update us with the response that you've received from our 3 members of Parliament with regards to your letter?
Yes, I can. There has been no response at this particular point. But given the nature of both the letter going out, and in fact, it wasn't stating, to my recollection, that we were unhappy with all that the government had done. We were raising specific points geared around the levelling up agenda and actually saying that this is where we saw that we would potentially need money from the government. We have always been very, very clear, both in opposition and currently, with regards to the position the government is in. And remember, this is a government that inherited a war chest of 0 with a letter saying, ha ha, the money's all gone from the previous Labour government. So we're not going to be taking any lessons on fiscal probity from you scallywags. But what we do have is a situation where we've got a COVID pandemic that's been running for over 2 years, where a government has dug its hands deep into its pockets right the way across the nation to actually make sure that people from all elements of communities were supported through the pandemic. And it's shameful for you to insinuate anything other.
Shameful of me to insinuate the contents of your letter that complained about the support that the government was giving local authorities and the threats that we were going to have to make to cut local services. The very contents of your letter. You say one thing on paper and another thing in a public meeting. Clearly,
no, but as you well know, sometimes it's a positioning letter in order to actually persuade the government that we need more money. And I'm sure you're clever enough to understand the way that these things work. And I know that you're just making a political point, and I will forgive you for it in this informal meeting.
Well, what I'm particularly concerned about, Mr. Chairman, is that we've got a budget coming up, we've got a deficit coming forward. You've outlined your own concerns with it, and we've got 3. We live in one of the most unequal boroughs in the country. We've spent a good time tonight, quite rightly, talking about levelling up. And if we're serious about it, government has got to put its hand in its pocket and pay up. But we've had 3 members of Parliament who haven't actually bothered to respond to you. That's a particular concern to me. And that's something we absolutely need to address. And I look forward to hearing an update at the next meeting and the full council, hoping that our members of Parliament have actually responded. And
I'm sure they will. I just see nobody else indicating to speak on this item. So this item is concluded. We move on to the final item, the draft work programme for 2021-2022, starting on page 53. I presume that this is Karina, are you leading on this?
Yes, Chairman, I can do. Yeah, this is just the committee work programme for the committee to note. The first 4 items scheduled to take place in February are the ones that were taken from the December meeting that didn't take place. We are hoping to be back in St George's by February, so all being well, all these decisions can be taken. So really it's just for noting and for any members' comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any members wish to comment? Councillor Smith.
At last, you see me, and I did want to say something about the other point. That 1.7 million Councillor Sullivan was alluding to is mainly inflation. Bit of a dirty word now in westernised economies. But I wanted to ask for something to be on the work programme. There's something I worked very hard on, and it was brought to this committee to agree, was the introduction of criminal records checks for councillors. Now, I appreciate we've had a couple of by-elections during this municipal year, but what has happened to it? Has it been ditched, overlooked? You know, this is very important, I feel, criminal records checks for councillors. Us county members, we have to have a criminal records checks, and that's why we introduced it. Can this be on the work programme to find out what the latest situation is with your administration and giving the public their bit of reassurance that their councillors have to undertake a criminal records check?
Yet again, it's a red herring, because county do have CRB checks, and the reason for that is because they come into contact with different groups of people, different groups of residents that you wouldn't expect borough councillors to become involved with. There is no mechanism if somebody is CRB checked to prevent them holding office. There is no methodology. What you should be doing is exhorting the Electoral Commission to ask for CRB checks to be done for all candidates prior to even standing, so that at least then residents know whether they're getting somebody that has got the probity to stand when they're up for election. But the practicalities of expecting an elected member to have a CRB check, apart from the expense and the cost that it incurs, is that there's no requirement for them to disclose it. There's nothing that could be done if that CRB check was found to be there was a case to answer for an individual. We have no power to actually remove them from office. So therefore, it's just a complete chasing the tail exercise for the purposes of making or potentially casting aspersions on other members. So it's not really on the remit to go any further. But if you wanted it to, you're quite welcome to take a motion to council and have the debate, and let council decide whether it's the thing that they think should be done.
Mr. Chairman, can I come back, please?
Of course.
I think I've got it. I mean, what you've just said about the reasons for not having it, you could have the same excuse with county, but my main concern is, as one of the biggest landlords in the borough, tenants contact their local council and say, look, I've got this outstanding repair in. They assume all councils of people are good and proper. We go into residents' homes, okay, COVID's slightly changed though, and we look at their faults and we take up their issues. Residents ask us to visit them, or when we're out door knocking, residents will ask us to come in and look at a fault or talk with them. That's why we brought the criminal records check. So am I right to assume, Mr. Chairman, that under your watch, no council will be getting a criminal records check?
No, what I'm saying is that there has to be something you can do. So let me ask you, Councillor Smith. Let's say, God forbid, that you did a CRB check and it was found that you had something on your record which was untoward. How does the council now prevent you from entering a resident's house or actually conducting your business as councillor? How does this council have the power to remove you from office? How does the council have any power to actually change things to whether there was something untoward on your criminal record check or not?
Or if I may reply, Mr. Chairman, if you recall, all of our completed criminal record checks taken of December of 2020 was given to the monitoring officer, Mr. Birkinshaw, and what you just said could also apply to county members. But what this enables to be done is that anyone who runs for public office in Basildon knows they won't escape a criminal records check. And it is down to group leaders to see those criminal records checked. Every one of my group at the time in December 2020, I asked to see their criminal record and they saw mine, and all of my group was squeaky clean. And that's the standard us as group leaders should be maintaining within our groups.
I can see the officers have indicated, so let's hear from those. Stuart, did you still want to speak? Your hand went up.
I suspect I was going to say the same thing that Paul is going to say, which is that there are rules and regulations about who can apply for a DBS check, what circumstances you can apply, and what the information is that's released. It isn't a case that it's optional for us to apply. We are not allowed to apply for a DBS check unless certain criteria are met. But I suspect that the point that Paula was going to clarify.
Thank you. Paula?
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, just so we do ask members to undertake a DBS check on an annual basis. It's not mandatory. It's up to individual members whether they choose to do so. But obviously, you know, as the leader says, we can't oblige members to do that. We certainly can't apply for checks on behalf of individual members. It's for members to make that application themselves.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, last comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with what Paul has just said, when will we be asked to undertake during this municipal year our criminal records checks, please?
Yeah, I can answer that later. I believe I would have to check records, but I believe there was a request sent out at the beginning of this municipal year. It's usually sent out after the annual meeting.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, I must confess, I don't recall seeing it either. So if that is remiss, then that's remiss, and we can pick that up now, and it can be sent out to folk in due course. Malcolm.
Yeah, Chairman, I do recall seeing it, and I do recall responding, saying that I had a clean one from County Hall. Did the council want a copy of it? Which I think I put it on my paperwork at the side. I'm quite happy to share it, but I think we need to take on board the fact the officers have said we have no power to demand it. And County Hall, it's because of our corporate parenting role. It's for no other purpose.
No, thank you. Is that an old hand, Paula, or a new hand?
Apologies, it's an old hand.
Okay. Right, well, that concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for attending this informal meeting of the Policy and Resource Executive. And I would say get home safely, but I don't think we need to bother with that at this particular point in time. Have a good rest of day and stay safe. Thank you.